But while we're here and while we've got some time before the conference, I thought it'd be fun to record a podcast episode with Matt. And whereas previously with other guests, I've tended to talk about specific topics and had a specific reason for bringing them on, with Matt, a lot of people have suggested you as a guest to have on the podcast. It's kind of a no-brainer. Cool. But they all want me to talk about different things with you. But one thing that they all kind of have in common is some kind of relevance to ethics and morality.
Right.
So I think it would be good to begin if you could give us an overview of where you stand as in your views to ethics and morality, because previously you've said that you kind of take a Sam Harris line, but I'm not sure if you agree with him on everything or if there are important differences there. What would be your kind of metaethical framework?
Well, I don't agree with anybody on everything, including me.
Right.
That's how you end up changing your mind. For a while, I gave a talk on the superiority of secular morality. And my goal there was to have a sort of packaged response to accusations that atheists, secularists, et cetera, didn't have any sort of foundation for morality. And I stopped giving that talk. Normally, I don't repeat talks, but this was one I gave in several places because I felt it was important. I stopped giving that talk after Sam published The Moral Landscape because we were largely on the same page with, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, Sam and I have talked about this. I'm not exactly sure to what extent we do disagree. I know there are some small things. There was one thing in the book that I talked with him about where I thought his example was potentially flawed, but going back through the book, I couldn't find it again when he and I were sharing a stage because I wanted to rehash it. My take is pretty much based on a foundation of well-being. I didn't use the well-being label, so that was what I was talking about, but I didn't have the neat package that Sam put it in, where he's drawing analogies to health, like physical health, which I think is great because, health isn't particularly well-defined and we don't know everything about it. And it seems to parallel how we understand morality fairly well. By the way, I get asked this question a lot. I don't know when I might have answered it. I don't think I draw any useful distinction between morality and ethics. I mean, to me, they're two labels for essentially the same thing. When people parse it out into like subtle differences, I understand what they're talking about, but I don't make the distinction myself that much.
Yeah, I think we can just treat them as synonyms. But so the view essentially is one that I think most people share, and I share in a roundabout way too, that morality and ethics are essentially just concerned with well-being.
Yeah.
And I suppose what I want to ask you is a deceptively difficult question, which is why? Why should we care when we're talking about what is right and wrong and good and bad? Why is it that well-being, as opposed to any other possible quality, like virtuousness or hair color or whatever, like what is it about well-being in and I don't know if you see it in an objective sense, but how can you justify the view that should be the focus of what we're talking about when it comes to right and wrong?
Yeah, on morality, I've talked about objective morality, and by that I think morality is objective only in the sense that I can make objective moral valuations once I have a goal. The goal itself may ultimately be subjective. So depending on how my detractors want to frame it, they'll say, oh, well, you're talking about subjective morality. Well, I am if you talk about the core value of we're going to focus on well-being. I've used a chess game as an analogy before because the rules of chess are ultimately arbitrary. We made them up. The goal of chess is, some would say to win. I would say it's to not lose, considering the number of draws we end up having. But once you have that as a goal, you can then evaluate moves within the game to find out which ones move you closer to that goal or further away.
Right.
This issue that you're specifically asking about is one where I'm not even convinced Sam did a particularly good job, and there may not be a really good answer, because ultimately it comes down to, well, why should we care about well-being?
Exactly.
That's the nutshell. Okay, you've said morality is about well-being. Why do we care about well-being? I kind of have addressed that in two ways. Number one, if somebody doesn't think that that's what morality is, okay, fine. I won't use the morality label with that person. I'm happy to throw out any label that's getting in the way of conversation between individuals. I think that what we've always talked about when we talked about morality, I think well-being is the best example of what we're talking about. But if somebody says, oh, that's not morality, then my answer is, okay, then I don't care about morality in the sense that you do. I do care about well-being. As to why we care about it, some of the examples that you started to give and that anybody could give, when I ask somebody, what do you mean by morality? Well, right and wrong behavior, or the sort of things that make life better or worse. And they're always really kind of ill-defined. And anytime I've been able to get someone to focus on what they mean, what is their standard or goal, it seems to me to be encompassed by well-being in some regard or another, which is why I'm fine with that being the label. Now, to be fair, probably one of the things Sam's most criticized for is that well-being isn't particularly well-defined either. And it is kind of a weasel word of, well, what are you talking about when you talk about, oh, I'm talking about well-being. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I avoid using the term well-being, not out of principle. It's just not my favorite term to use. But to me, what well-being essentially means is pleasure and the avoidance of pain.
I include that as a facet for sure. I think that there may be, I worry that sometimes those get perhaps overly simplified, or that it might be a little too reductive.
Okay.
But I'm not sure, because that's another thing is when you talk about pleasure and pain, obviously you're not merely talking about physical pain, but you're also talking about emotional pain and other things like that. Mm-hmm. That may in fact be all encompassing. But the reason I went with the well-being label is because I didn't have a good label. And when Sam presented that along with, analogies to health and things like that, it made sense to me. And I was like, that's good enough for a start, because none of us are claiming that we've solved morality.
Right.
It's an ongoing process.
Okay, so when you talk about well-being, are you talking about your well-being? Are you talking about the well-being of a society, of a tribe, of a species, of what is the well-being applying to? Because for me, the metaethical view that I have, which we can get into if you want, I might be interested to hear,
Sure.
to hear your thoughts on it. But it essentially breaks down to a view that it's like a psychological utilitarianism that says that the only thing that can be ultimately desired in and of itself by a human being is their own pleasure. And from that, I can reason that evolutionarily speaking, as a social species, it makes sense that we should care about other people's pleasure because it's intertwined with our own. Like you can read Dawkins in The Selfish Gene, you can read Singer in The Expanding Circle to explain why that would be the case. Would you follow a similar line of reasoning, or do you jump kind of straight to well-being in general is a good thing?
No, my reasoning is almost identical.
Okay.
I've actually argued that, because what comes under attack quite frequently in these discussions is, how do you justify altruism? And I've made the case that I can justify what people call altruism from a purely selfish point of view.
Yeah. So how would you do that?
I want, if I'm only concerned about my life and the pleasure and pain of my life, or the benefiting it, it's undeniable that I have to share space with other people on this planet. My actions affect them, their actions affect me. And so it's often in my best interest to do things for other people. Now, personally, I get a great deal of pleasure personally from doing things for other people. Watching other people, something I've done has made somebody happy or benefited them, I benefit from that. And I realize that that's a psychological, trapping from our evolutionary history and our starting with small tribes and expanding. But even if I were completely selfish, I would still need to take the actions that also benefit society, because I benefit from society. That's where I think people get short-sighted.
Right.
It is not, oh, I'm doing good for somebody else because it raises my stature. Sure, it might. When I work with Atheists Helping the Homeless or one of those organizations, it makes me look good because I can come on a video like this and say, well, I work with Atheists Helping the Homeless. And that it clearly benefits people's perception of me. But it's also the fact that I'm contributing to making the world a better place, and I will benefit from that as well.
Yeah, that itself is a selfishness, the pleasure that you receive from knowing that you've done a good thing because you have empathy or something like that.
People get a view of selfishness where it's me at the expense of others.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be. It's like ethical egoism.
It's why I'm an educator to some extent. We can argue about to what extent that's true. But I have no kids. So why would I care about supporting public education and higher education? It's because the more people around me who have a better understanding of the world, the better the world is for me as well.
Right. So, do you think there is such thing as a genuinely selfish, selfless act? Do you think there can, like metaphysically speaking, is it possible to do an action that is genuinely selfless with no personal benefit whatsoever?
I'm not only not convinced that that's possible, I'm fairly convinced it's not possible.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And I have an interesting thought experiment to perhaps demonstrate this. I want to ask you a question,
Okay.
Which was put to me in a pub one night from a physics and philosophy student at Oxford.
As most good questions are.
Precisely, yeah. And I haven't stopped thinking about it since. And the question is this: would you rather kill an innocent person and then immediately forget that you've done so, or not kill that innocent person but live the rest of your life thinking that you had and living with that guilt?
That is an incredibly good question.
I'll tell you why I think it's such a good question, because one of the first things that people will want to say is, well, of course, I would rather not kill the innocent person. But I think it requires a bit more thought than that. I'm not necessarily asking what should you do. I'm asking what would you do? What would you be capable of doing?
It's an incredibly difficult question because it's ultimately impossible, or essentially impossible, because when I'm reflecting on the question, evaluating them,
right,
it's hard to imagine a scenario where I don't remember.
Yeah, and in fact, that's the problem with a lot of like criticisms against utilitarian views of ethics. Like people say, for instance, when people talk about ethics being your own well-being, it's like, ask a parent, would you rather their kids do really, really well, but the parent believes the kids are doing terribly, or the kids do terribly and the parents believe they're doing really well? Well, the utilitarian should have to say that the parent would rather their kids do badly because they're chasing after their own pleasure. But the reason why parents wouldn't say that, the utilitarian can come back and just say, well, that's just because they can't imagine that. Like they have the benefit of this kind of omniscience of the situation.
Right.
And I think the same thing happens here. But I think it's not unreasonable to suggest that the rational thing to do in that situation, in the situation I'm putting to you at least, is to have yourself kill the innocent person and then immediately forget. I feel like that would be not necessarily what you should do, but what enough people, if you give it enough thought, realize that they actually would.
That's roughly where my instinct kind of came down on it. That
Yeah.
For my own benefit, not remembering that I'd done something awful, would probably be preferable. On the other hand, from the omniscient standpoint, the world would be better off probably in most circumstances
Right.
where I didn't kill someone but had the memory of doing it.
Yeah, so this illustrates why I think we can say quite confidently that there's no such thing as a truly selfless act, because if you were able to choose, so if you were to choose to kill the person, then that shows that really you are kind of selfish in an ultimate sense. Whereas if you choose not to kill the person, the only reason you could possibly do that is because of the pleasure that you derive right now from this position
Correct.
of omniscience, from knowing you've done the virtuous thing, right?
Yep.
So whichever way you spin it, you're getting something from it.
Yeah, it can only be viewed from that stance. That's why it's almost impossible to remove yourself from that situation, because if I killed someone and immediately forgot it, obviously it would have zero impact on my life that I'm aware of. But this is the curious thing about the ability, the theory of mind of putting yourself in somebody else's position and developing empathy. If in fact I had not killed someone and had the memory and suffered personally for that, I would have to probably say that the world would be better off and I would benefit from the world being better off, even though I wasn't directly aware of it, because I would be, suffering.
Yeah, but again, you need that position of omniscience to make that.
You can't get there.
To make that judgment.
It's one of the reasons why I love so many thought experiments and the intuition pump type thing that Dan Dennett comes up with.
Yeah.
I love these, and there was a similar question to that I'd been asked at once, but not that one specifically. And even just sitting here talking about it, I'm not sure that I could give an answer because it's so difficult to divorce yourself from the question stance.
Yeah, but so okay, so let's ask a slightly different question, which is, rather than what you think you would do, what do you think you should do?
I would argue that given what I understand about the broader, well, there are a couple factors that we can't possibly take into account. Like, yes, it's an innocent person we're talking about, but that doesn't mean that their innocence makes them a benefit to society in a way that would impact me.
Sure. Okay.
As opposed to, a hindrance. But by and large, I would go with the one where I would say that the right action, I think, is to do the one where I would be suffering for something I didn't do, because ultimately, if we're assuming an innocent person and all other factors being equal, I would still benefit from that, even in ways that I wouldn't see.
Right. Okay. So the view of ethics that you're taking, I'm interested because you're saying that it is essentially taking this self-interested, egoistic view of morality and being able to apply it through methods like empathy
Right.
to apply to other people. What do you do when faced with somebody who, let's say, they don't have an empathy for people who don't share their skin color?
Right.
And so you can even using sort of your objectivist moral framework, the best you can possibly do is say that your pleasure is a good thing. And they say, well, listen, my pleasure is not predicated on the pleasure of people who don't share my skin color. So I'm not going to care. I'm not even going to take those people into my moral framework or consideration. What do you say to someone like that?
Well, I think you have to have a conversation where at least there's some motivation, assuming that I'm convinced they are wrong, and there needs to be a way to have the conversation where they can potentially realize that they're wrong.
And do you think that they're wrong in the sense that they should be empathetic, or do you think they're wrong in the sense that they are actually empathetic, but they just don't kind of they haven't tapped into it?
I think that showing that their selective empathy is a bit myopic.
Okay.
Is the path to go down, because I haven't met that many people who truly would go down that path. And I know some people who are fairly awful racists. I've met people like that. But getting them to recognize that they're drawing a line that is in the incorrect place, because, someone with skin color that doesn't match yours doesn't tell you anything at all about what they're going to contribute to your life, what they're going to contribute to the world. And that seems to me to be almost undeniable, that yes, you might prefer this. When you asked the question initially about the selfish motivations, et cetera, and I talked about altruism from a selfish perspective. The other aspect of that is that I think people, because I care most about me and then people around me and people I care about in these expanding circles, I think most people overlook the impact that others are going to have on the world around them, and how much that's going to affect them. We see the immediate, and it's been described as looking at the world through a slit, where you perhaps with bad eyes, where you can only really intuitively understand the immediate gratification, the short-term effects, and it obviously gets incredibly frustrating when you talk about, well, why should I care about a butterfly in Sri Lanka just because it might have an impact?
Right.
There's nothing about it that's easy, but if somebody said to me, I only care about people who share my skin color, then I would ask them how they justify that, knowing that people who don't share their skin color have done things that have contributed to the betterment of the world, and people who share their skin color have done things that have affected the world in ways that are detrimental.
Okay, so do you think that a person's moral worth, given that morality is predicated on your own well-being, and when I say your own, I mean you in the general sense,
Sure.
like whoever is doing the thinking, does that mean that the moral worth of an agent, a person, a thing, is predicated on its effect on your well-being, or is there something more than that? The reason I ask is because, let's say that this person then changes their tune and says, well, okay, so people who don't make a net contribution to society, and that doesn't mean people who are evil, that just means people who perhaps just live their life doing effectively nothing.
Sure.
I'm not going to take them into my moral consideration at all, because they're not contributing to society in such a way, or even if they do contribute to society, they might not do so in such a way that benefits me. So to me, I don't feel like it's strong enough. I feel like it's too weak a principle, because you can come around and you can say, well, there are loads and loads and loads of people on the planet who genuinely will have no effect on my well-being in the positive or negative sense. And yet surely I can't just omit them from my moral consideration. Like when there's a famine in their area, I can't just say, well, I don't care. Surely there has to be something a bit more than just how it's going to affect my own well-being.
Yeah, I tie this to a couple other things that we mentioned actually before we started shooting, and that's the world is complex, and I'm not confident that I'm able to accurately assess for any individual. Like we talked briefly about, there are people who may never change their mind, but I don't know who those people are until after I've spoken with them, and maybe not even then. And so I can say, okay, my experience with this person is such that they're now entrenched in this mindset, be it bigotry or whatever, and maybe they'll never change their mind. But I know that the capacity for people like them to change their mind exists because we've seen it.
Yeah.
And not knowing whether they fall into the category of people who aren't going to change their mind or people who are, mean that the best course of action that I can come up with is to treat everybody as if they truly have the potential to change their mind and engage with them along that front. I think it's similar. I can't tell who's going to impact my life in what way until after it's happened.
Yeah.
And so, I've had people who were genuinely good friends of mine who I trusted implicitly, who turned out to be just the most awful sociopathic liars who took advantage of me and other people. And yeah, that hurts. I tend to be incredibly positive in the sense that, okay, I learned a lesson there too. Now maybe I'm a better judge of character. But because I don't have that omniscient level of knowledge, I have to, the most expedient way for me to make those assessments is to say, maybe Alex is just terrible, or maybe there's a conflict between us, but I'm going to continue to operate under the assumption that people are generally decent or subject to, reason,
Mm-hmm.
and that there's going to be some impact on my life, hopefully positive, that I may not be able to tell right away. And worst case, how I treat you affects your life in ways that where even if you don't directly contribute or even dramatically indirectly contribute to my well-being, people who care about you might. And so let's say, you have a sibling who is going to discover a cure for cancer, but if I, kill you or destroy your life or whatever, that fundamentally changes their path. The variables are too complex. And so for me, erring on the side of hope, for lack of a better word, seems to me to be the best course of action.
Sure. Before moving on, I'm just interested, based on what you said a minute ago about people and changing minds and susceptibility. When was the last time you changed your mind?
Oh my.
I don't want to spring that question. I don't want any hesitation to be taken as an indication that you haven't. It's hard to, I know it's hard to pin down, but.
Well, it's easy to say I've changed my mind today on small things,
Right.
just from the course of us having a conversation about changing a better way to talk about something, or perhaps, I remember Stephen and I had a conversation on Rationality Rule on his channel about free will, and I've always identified it, or largely always identified as a compatibilist a la Dennett. But during that discussion, I clearly, obviously changed my mind on how I was going to talk about those things. And it reminds me, we had like a 3.5 hour discussion on nonprofits one time about free will. And it turned out when it was all over, we all agreed on what we do and don't have. We just disagreed on what to call it.
Yeah, exactly. I find that happens all the time.
And there were plenty of things that I've changed my mind on. Bigger things are rarer. Obviously, I changed my mind on the God thing, going from a fundamentalist Southern Baptist to an atheist.
Yeah.
That I changed my mind on a number of political issues over the years. Like there was a period of time where I was like a full-on Rush Limbaugh, ditto head, ultra conservative. And I think there was somebody who changed my mind the other day, not in a dramatic sense, but in a slighter sense, on the issue of cultural appropriation and where you draw the lines on that.
Okay.
But
Which way did they move you?
I'm going to get in a lot of trouble for this. There are serious concerns about what gets labeled as cultural appropriation. My take on it's fairly simple. If you're doing it to caricature, disparage, or malign some ethnicity or culture, that I would find objectionable. But if you are not, intent matters. And merely, my wife has a dress that's a Mexican dress. And there was a period of time where she wasn't sure if she should wear it because people were criticizing, oh, you're appropriating Mexican culture. The truth is that she bought it from a Mexican woman at the Dia de los Muertos festival, at some point. And it's done not to disparage anybody, and not even as a celebration. It's, I like this dress. And I've seen people go far too far in the sense of, if you're creating fusions of cuisine, you're culturally appropriating. And I think that's absolute garbage. We have to consider that I would argue that nobody owns culture, and that I'm not particularly tied to this notion of even preserving heritage, which annoys some friends of mine. There are people in my family tree who formed one of the first churches in the Southern Baptist Convention. I don't care. It contributed to the world, but it doesn't define me. And so I to whatever extent I enjoy studying history, it's a curiosity, it's informative, but to say, oh, this is my culture and therefore nobody else can do anything with it, it's almost like you're trying to copyright sounds.
Yeah, I mean, like, culture itself is just an amalgamation of previous cultural influences that come together to
and I don't mean
culture.
sounds like songs, because I know somebody's going to be, well, you can,
Yeah, but I know what you mean.
Sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. But that's why I feel like cultural appropriation is not a useful term in the slightest, because when you're talking about the mockery of a culture, for the purpose, the intent of actually making a mockery, then it's not cultural appropriation, it's cultural mockery.
Yeah.
And so if the only kind of form of cultural appropriation that matters in a negative moral sense is the type in which you're making a mockery, surely we should just sort of do away with the idea of cultural appropriation as a whole.
Well, I think it's a term that it may be falling off. One of the things is that there's a lot of things that are ill-defined and people jump on board with and like, yes, that's bad. And then they try to lump as much other stuff in as they can. I'm opposed to people doing blackface because I know the impact that it has on African Americans. This was an old minstrel show mockery. That's not what I would call cultural appropriation at all. I know organizations that ban the wearing of Native American headdresses and stuff like that. I think that probably has more to do with the fact that the Washington Redskins have a name that offends Native Americans, and so all of that gets lumped in together. I don't think that anybody doing it as a celebration or an appreciation of a culture has done anything that I would consider wrong.
Right, and you kind of and what you kind of didn't really think this before. This is something that you.
Well, there's the notion that the people who are part of this group get to define what is right or wrong with respect to their group.
Okay.
And rather than now viewing it as they get to define what's right or wrong, it's I'm willing and eager to consider that they are offended or bothered by something, and then take that on board to decide how I'm going to act. And so I did a video once that was about don't use that word, where people were trying to engage in some language policing and offense. And I pointed out that there's a context in which there's not a single word we could come up with or have ever come up with where I think that it's necessarily offensive or problematic on its own. There are some words, like we will say the N-word, because that's what
strange,
people do.
Isn't it, how that happens?
I recognize I've met people and they talk about the real damage and harm and emotional trauma that is tied to words like that. And as an individual, I have to decide, okay, I'm not going to use those words. Actually, I never had to decide not to use it because it was pretty much drilled into me to begin with. But now at least I have a better justification for why I don't use the term. Yeah,
but you can't even use it in a meta sense, in the sense that you'd use other words.
We actually had a conversation on a podcast recently where I uttered the word specific. It's like, it's one of those things where if nobody knew what the N-word was, and you just said the N-word, that, well, what word do you mean? What word is it? So there's certainly, even everybody would recognize that context.
You know,
That
I think
is not the same.
some people just don't. Some people, I found that it does not matter the context in which you use that phrase. It's like you just cannot go there.
Yeah, I have personally, I've never had any interest in using it, certainly not in any derogatory sense. And that's just about being respectful about what somebody finds offensive. But there are occasions where someone will tell me, oh, I find that offensive. And my reply is tough shit. I mean, I can appreciate the fact that you do. I think you're I'm not talking about this specific, any specific words. People would say, oh, well, if you say the F word, I'm going to be offended. And I don't care.
Yeah.
Because I see no rational justification to be offended by that. I do see a rational justification for being offended and by words that are racially bigoted and things like that. I don't run around telling people you can't say this or you can't do this. That to me becomes it's like jokes. There's no sacred ground for jokes as far as I'm concerned. And what I mentioned the other day in a video is that if you're going to tell a joke, you need to make sure that you're aware of what the target of your joke is and what the potential consequences of telling that joke is. And as long as you're okay with those consequences, which includes being ostracized and considered to be a terrible person by many people, then that's your prerogative. On the other hand, if you're also going to complain about a joke, you should also be aware of what the target of the joke is.
Definitely, yeah.
Because there were jokes that came out after Notre Dame caught fire, and people were like, oh, I can't believe you joke about that. Well, tough. Do you even understand the target of the joke?
Yeah. So, I mean, Bill Maher ran into that problem when he made a joke involving the N-word. And I don't know if you saw when it happened. It was about a year ago, maybe. I don't
remember the specifics.
And he got absolutely hounded by it. And what I found was amazing was that the next week or the week after, something like that, you know, Ice Cube, the rapper,
right?
He came on the show. He came on Real Time, and he just lambasted Bill Maher for using this N-word. And obviously Bill was using it as a joke. And Ice Cube says, look, you just can't do that. That word is like a dagger in our back. And then I thought, Ice Cube, how many times have you used the F word, and I mean the derogatory word towards gay people,
sure,
in your music? And not as a joke, but in a strictly derogatory manner. I'm not hearing any apologies for that.
Yeah, and I think it's fair that he should be called out for that as well.
But what enraged me wasn't so much that he used the word in his rap songs. I mean, it was a different time back then. People didn't understand the weight of the word. Like, okay, fine, you can make whatever argument you want. What annoyed me...
But it's not like he was British. Well, because fag means something different.
Oh, yeah. We have a fag outside, yeah.
Yeah, and that's something different. But also, I mean, just notice, even in this, there's a fundamental difference about what you and I, even having a meta-level discussion about this, are and are not comfortable saying at different times. Mm-hmm. I know where ICE was coming from. I know why people were really irritated and chastising Bill Maher. I think to some extent they have a strong point. There are very few words I can think of that have been as damaging, but your example is good as well. I'm a huge Eminem fan, and you know, White America is probably one of my favorites from him. I think he's a great poet, but he'll use the derogatory terms for homosexuals in his music as well. Right. And I think that, you know, that should be called out. However, they should also still be free to say it.
Yeah, but so what annoyed me wasn't like Ice Cube's point. Like, I think he finally had a point. Like, okay, it was the double standard. It was why don't you apply that to yourself? Like, you didn't just use this word as a joke or on a meta level, and people, so it's like that's what you're criticizing Bill for doing.
It gets back to what we were talking about before, where I was talking about how we see through a slit. I care more about me and the people around me.
Right, exactly.
And so there needs to be awareness about these issues. Probably one of the bigger issues that I have is we're constantly working to raise people's awareness. And, you know, it gets labeled woke or whatever, so that you have a better understanding of what somebody else's life is like, so that you can see things through their eyes a little more readily.
Okay.
But we do it rather sloppily. And if somebody doesn't get it immediately, there's often well, you're just a terrible person, rather than, oh, I understand. You don't quite understand this yet because my lived experience isn't your lived experience type thing.